is a great way to start the day with a Steve's concept sketch and a giant cup of Karen coffee. Steve's table here, it only has 2 parts on it. But anyway, everything else is out in the garage. We're ready to pick it up, bring it in, touch it up if necessary, and then move on to painting the red. You know, it has that look of it could go either way. Snow, or it could be a good day. Now, I was out here before flipping battery chargers and everything looks pretty good, but you never know until you bring it inside and look under fluorescent lights. Fluorescent lights in the shop really show flaws that you really don't see otherwise, but this is what I would always do. These have dried overnight. Everything looks good when you take a quick look at it, but when you look at it under fluorescent lights, sometimes you see a spot that needs to be touched up. But if it does, it's not a problem. We already have it backmasked. It'll be a little sanding, and we still have the black in the gun. It'll be very easy to touch this up if it needs it. And I always want to touch it up now. Because once I flip the backmasking over, well, now it's a pro. I'm doubling and tripling my work. So we'll look this over real close in the shop. Let me bring everything in. So now with all the parts in the shop, just let them warm up as well as myself. It's still pretty cold out there. But what always amazes me is how good things look out in the sunlight, and when you bring them down under fluorescent light, you see mistakes you'd never see out in the sun. Now, for some people, that's great. They don't care. The problem is, from my background of working with the model planes and being judged on everything you do, I want it to be as good as I possibly can make it. So what happens with all painting, virtually all painting that I've ever done, and that includes butyrate dope, nitrate dope, acrylic lacquer, urethane, and this is a modern 4C, the 4th dimension paint that we're using in 4C Bondo. This is the general rule that always applies. If you start with a bare plastic or metal, a primer that's compatible with the paint you use, and then use all one brand, you minimize the chance of having any interaction, especially with the model airplane paints and some of the old lacquers. You couldn't put lacquer on top of enamel, enamel on top of lacquer, butyrate on top of nitrate, nitrate on top of butyrate. It was endless. So what I always do now, I have a table that has really high intensity fluorescent light, so I look at each part. Now what I try to do is evaluate, and this is a perfect example of what can happen when you paint plastic parts that already have a finish on them. Here's what happens. You can have 2 identical parts, they're off the same motorcycle. You have one, the paint has dried relatively normal. I guess normal is the right word. I don't see any terrible flaws in this, anything I can't live without. The other part, painted with the same paint on the same thing, has what I think is a contamination flaw. And if you look at that real close, it's not a speck that's in the paint. That's a contamination flaw. It looks like a little baby alligator skin. And it's the same thing is happening here. And you don't know why. Because you don't know when they made these parts in Japan. You have no idea what kind of paint they even used. I don't know if the macro lens can pick this up, but that is what that is. It's I have a word for it. It's called a contamination flaw. I look at this part. Now the other part seems fine. It's just this part. So you would never want to take the backmasking off and sand this. You may as well, you have the backmasking on it. This is a good time to sand it. Now what I found to fix this, and if you live in some kind of dream world where this never happens to you, you probably don't even need to watch videos. But the idea of my videos is to pass information on that I've gathered over 50 years of painting. So here's the thing. I want to sand this area out. In fact, I'll just lightly sand the whole part. And then I'm going to have to seal this with primer sealer. I'll probably put that primer sealer over the whole part and respray the black. And then a lot of people would just leave this and just put the clear on top or whatever. I don't want to do that. It'll take me 10-15 minutes to sand this part out. I'll use Indasa 600, and then I'll just go outside, just put a prime on wherever there's a bad spot or wherever I sand through. But if I sand through a lot of spots, I'll just reprimer the whole thing. It won't really matter. This is the whole thing I'm trying to explain, is to get to a very high level of finish. If you go to Earl Scheib, you just paint right over the dead bead. It's on the hood. But what happens if you watch Ammo NYC, high quality finish, they're constantly, even in the clear coats, they're picking away at there's dust in the clear, but it's endless. The day you stop fixing little mistakes in the paint is the day you ride the motorcycle away. Indasa Rhino Wet 600. This is the best material I know of for getting rid of the little contamination issues. And they're even worse if you were using model airplane paint and you were putting butyrate dope over nitrate dope, nitrate over butyrate. You always have that problem that you wake up in the morning and there's a little alligator, something, there's a little wrinkle in the paint. There's probably a proper word for it. I just call it a contamination issue. Two incompatible products are touching each other there. Now you might even remember we were painting some Ducati mirrors for Luciano for one of his restorations, and one mirror totally melted. I had to reprime it and resand it 3 or 4 or 5 times before I got it sealed to where it would take the paint. And the other mirror was perfect. Now they probably both came out of the same factory on the same day, maybe out of the same mold with the same material. But keep in mind, you know, when I was involved in the machine shop, part of our machine shop business was we were doing plastic molding, and there are a million kinds of plastic and a million chances for things to be incompatible. So as I go through this will only take a minute or so, and to do it now, the final job will just be that much nicer. So the key here is to seal that area. I want primer seal and not auto primer. Now I'll put that out in the laundromat to dry while I work on the next part. But the point here is, if I fix this now, the overall job, when we're all done with the clear and whatever, no matter what, this will be so much nicer. And you're always tempted, I'm always tempted even, to say, oh, nobody will see that, oh, nobody will see it. People see everything. The mouse in my shop will look up and see that and he'll say, Wendy, fix it. Now these parts dried with a rough, not really alligator skin, but a rough surface. But as long as I'm going to spend time today, I'm going to sand them out and get this just a little bit nicer. It only takes a few minutes to add that extra little step, and these parts will be just that much nicer. Now this guy just sanded out pretty nice. I'm not going to even reprime it. I'm just going to shoot this with black again. There's no reason. We don't have any real alligator skins on here. We just have these little spots that it didn't dry the way I would be happy with it. It's such a reasonable day to paint, I thought I'd get a couple little spots on this that needed sanding. Get this really nice, because the front fender, of course, especially the front part of it, is something you see right away. And this had a couple little areas. It was a nice shape. It's already been painted black, so I may as well give this a final coat of black, and that should bring us right up. We're done with this part, in fact. There's nothing. The drawing shows a black fender. But even if you're patient at this point, it's like putting a good foundation on a house. The more time you're willing to... Now, I always think when you're dealing with old stuff that has old paint underneath it, and old primer from Japan, and something else from somewhere else, and some kid that crashed a bike and used peanut butter for Bondo, And that's what the FZR project is this is, if you started with all new parts, if you ordered up a brand new metal tank, all you had to do is prime it, etch it, prime it, and sand it, well, you'd be so far ahead of the game. What we deal with, and the information that I try to pass on, is how to deal with things that aren't perfect. And in my experience anyway, when you're dealing with 25-year-old motorcycles, 30, 40, even the RD, that paint that's underneath, you don't even know what kind of paint it is. You don't know what country it came from. Back in the old days, they were using acrylic lacquer and all kinds of enamels, and you never know. But anyway, you do stack the deck in your favor if you do what we did on the FZR and just take it down to bare metal. But on this job, it wasn't that an appropriate choice. But we are going to spend the time, and look, as I speak, and I'll show this up close and personal, this is the kind of stuff, this was lurking under our paint job. See, now, this didn't show, and I want to show this on a macro lens if I can. It didn't show when we had it in black, but as I sanded into it, I see little spots where that paint was not happy. I call it contamination, alligator skinning. Let me show this up close if I can. Trouble is with all the stuff here, we never have a way of. What we need is a paint slave. Let me show this up close. I'm not sure if the macro lens is picking it up, but these are little contamination. You can actually minimize this. You can't eliminate it, but you can minimize it by using a very quick dry and thinner. But then you risk that the paint bond is not going to be real good. You're trading one for the other. There's little spots here where that paint is not happy. So the answer for this is I'm going to sand this whole thing. I'll do the other side too, of course. Sand the whole thing, reprime it, and put the black on again. And that's really the right way to do it. Hopefully. I guess we're going to find out. I wanted to show this, and this is why I always do. If in doubt, sand it. If you see anything looks like contamination, that was just alligator skinning just underneath the black paint. Now the odds are good. We could have buried that and never seen it. And the odds are good that once you put this out in the sun a few days, you get a bubble there or you get something. So this part, the tank, I'm going to take it right outside right now, tack rag it, prime it, let that prime dry, and do the black over. We've really ducked a bullet here. Okay, there's about an hour dry time in this temperature, but we have plenty of other stuff to work on down there. We have the fairing and that bottom piece of the fairing. Now I'm going to block sand this whole part down, looking for some more contamination issues, thinking if those first plastic parts had them, this part will have them too. And I don't want to bury that. I want primer, sealer in between that and my final finish. It was worth doing the lower cowl, even though it doesn't have any real bad contamination. It had a little bit, and a little spot down here where the paint wasn't happy. It's on the bottom of the motorcycle, but hey, if we're going to do it, we may as well do it right, or pretend we do it right anyway. Alright, everything's drying up in the laundromat. One by one, we're going through the pieces. And I know at the end of this job, we'll be very happy that we put this little extra time in. It'll be so worth it. That looks like it's going to be real nice. And it looks like, actually, I always keep track of the weather. May even see the sun today. The fairing, as I wipe it down and get ready for paint, the fairing had a lot of contamination on it. But again, You never know where these parts have been. You never know if the person maintained it, waxed it. Some people don't do anything. Anyway, we did want to emphasize again that the parts on this that really had rough contamination and were showing through with alligator skin, I reprined them. The ones that just have little imperfections, things that I know I can sand out, and each time you do this, the parts get a little bit nicer and a little bit nicer. And in the end, if you're persistent and patient, it really pays off. And here we are in the middle of this freezing winter. It's nice to be able to get an extra day in like this. This was a day I wasn't really anticipating, so everything backs up a little bit. Maybe Steve's going to have to buy another can of black. I don't care. It's his money. Well, I do want the job to be as nice as I can make it. And it doesn't, the extra effort, a couple bucks extra for paint or for towels or whatever, sandpaper, in the end, when you take this bike and start it up and drive away, worth every penny. That's the best advice I can ever give. The best advice. Now, before I end any day and go up and have a gigantic Karen coffee, I wanted to take a look, put my parts to sleep for the night. And I think this was a day very, very well spent. I'm sure Steve will appreciate the little extra effort we put in. And we know that the black part of this job should be really nice. Now, before we end the video, I wanted to say one thing. Some people have asked me, why would you restore an old FZR? What's so special about an FZR? Well, there's a lot of things special to me. The time Luciano and I bought this bike, we had a lot of fun. We had a lot of good rides. We basically had 3 years of track days with it. It's been a lot of fun. Since I've got it modified to suit my behind with the high handlebars and the various other things, the exhaust that has a nice sound that I like. To me, it's a bike worth restoring. And I want to put a couple of short video clips right after this to show you why I love my FZR.